When I was a freshman in college at William & Mary, you had to take a freshman seminar, and I took a class called Southeast Asian Philosophy and American Culture. That's a mouthful. In many ways, however, I would credit that class as changing my life. It is ultimately what got me down the road to doing this, rather than being a math teacher, which is what I had gone to school to do. In it, and that professor I had for that class, and then I did cultural anthropology with him as well, because he taught in the anthropology department. And he would always assign to us journaling projects. So we had to keep a composition notebook where we journaled every day, and then we'd have to turn it into him, and he would, comment on thoughts and whatever. And at the time, I thought it was just a creepy way for a professor to know what was going on in the heads of all of their students. It is, in some ways, the practice of ethnography, of observing a culture, and I get some of that. It also happens to be... By the way, just so you know, journaling every day for me looks like, I have to turn this in tomorrow. Last Monday, I was doing this, and I was probably thinking about this. And on Tuesday, let's say that I was doing, anyway. So fast forward years later, probably about 10 years ago, I was at a conference in San Antonio on the Jesus Way, and the speaker brought up journaling, and he said, have you ever run into that person who thinks journaling is the answer to everything? Right? They're like, journaling is awesome! I'm struggling. I don't know how to do the laundry. Oh, you should journal. I'm in a place in my spiritual journey. You should journal, right? And his whole point that he was getting at is what is a great spiritual practice for one person may put you in a place of dust and death. So there's no such thing as the universally great spiritual practice. For some people, journaling is wonderful, and for other people, journaling is like, I want to live it and think it, but I don't really, really want to write it down. And that is interesting to think about for what we're going to get to today, where in our conversation on commitment and discipleship, we're going to talk about what it means to be a self-differentiated leader or a self-differentiated disciple. What does it mean for me to have my identity and keep that whole and separate from the tasks that I do, and from your identity, so that Andrew can be Andrew and Brandon can be Brandon, and I don't need to make him look like me, and he doesn't need to make me look like him. Because it may be that he loves journaling, although what I know of Brandon makes me think he does not. So I picked the wrong person in this scenario. I bet Sandra loves journaling. Sandra, do you love journaling? Yes, see, and Sandra can love journaling, and that can be spiritually, emotionally, physically transformative for her. And I could celebrate that while saying, I am not going to journal. This brings me to the text that we read today, and you saw that coming, right? I want to engage this text, but I want to engage this text in two ways. I want to engage this text for how we have generally been taught to hear and see this text, and then to invite you in an entirely different way to read and engage this text. You see, for most of us, starting early on with Sunday school, in fact, it came up in First Light, probably you even just have a picture from the hand-drawn picture on your, little one-fold children's Sunday school curriculum, and in it, I can almost guarantee you, your mind's eye has Martha in an apron with maybe a good wooden kitchen spoon. Because Martha sits in the kitchen and makes food. That's what she does. And she does that while Mary sits in the living room at the feet of Jesus, soaking up every word he has to say. And what we want to learn is that Mary demonstrates the desire to listen to Jesus and let go of all of these mundane tasks Martha is so consumed with. In fact, that stage was set as early as Origen, and that's not a name you need to remember, except that it's funny that his name is Origen, but it's Origen, and it's the origin of a lot of the church, right? Because he's one of the very early church fathers. And in a very early stage, Origen writes of this text and has us set in it for 2,000 years to come, that Martha symbolizes action and Mary symbolizes contemplation, and that Martha represents the Jews and their observation of the law, and Mary represents the Christian church and spiritual renewal and spiritual law. So let's all be more like Mary. Is the general intent of the text. Now, some of us along the way got a little discomfortable at this idea like Martha is wrong and Mary is right. But it's so written into the text, even to the part where we put in Jesus' mouth, Mary has chosen the better part, which is arguably not even in the Greek, which says Mary has chosen a good portion. And that's what I'm going to draw us back into, not on my own work. I'm borrowing some exegetical work from others to look at this text and see that the picture we had painted for us has locked us into a more patriarchal reading of these two characters that's missed what was really going on. First of all, Jesus is walking with they, which is probably his disciples, who disappear from the text, and I've always kind of loved the idea that Peter is in the corner of the house shuffling his feet, trying not to pay attention to this whole little interaction, really mostly because he doesn't want to wash dishes. And so he's uncomfortably not participating and trying not to pay attention that there's this whole thing going on over there. But they disappears, and it's just Jesus. And it says Martha welcomes, Martha really in the text receives Jesus, right? Now, I want us to remember what's been going on in chapter 10, which I don't expect that you remember because we haven't been reading it. But this is a power-packed chapter in Luke. We get the sending of the 70 who are going out in pairs to take good news, and anytime they are not received by a house, it says, knock the dust off from your feet and continue on, right? And then we get the Good Samaritan story, where the Good Samaritan, while he's out on the road, does ministry and is willing to see to the other person who's been beaten up, and then take him to an innkeeper and gives the innkeeper money to care for him. And for reasons you'll start to see when I look at the Good Samaritan post this reading, I start to think we don't lift up the innkeeper enough. He's not on the road, but he still cares for the Samaritan when entrusted with the Samaritan's care, right? Some people stay home and some people go on the road, and it's both ministry. But that's a spoiler alert to the rest of my sermon. So Martha is here in a home. It's not her home necessarily. Maybe it is. The text doesn't actually say that in the Greek. She just is in a house and receives Jesus. And then it identifies this Martha, which Luke, interestingly, so Mary, Martha, and Lazarus are all brothers and sisters, and they're very well known to us in the text, but Luke here introduces them like we don't know who they are, right? So it just says, there was a Martha, right? And then, so it wants to clarify who this Martha is, because there's lots of people with the same name. It's just really awesome if they would have invented last names before, modern times, so we would know who they all were. So it says, and then Mary was her sister. And Mary sat at the feet of Jesus listening to him. Now, society has been taught us that means Mary is here in the house with Martha and is sitting at Jesus' feet listening to him, even though it never tells us Jesus is teaching anything. What we also know, however, is that the common way you might talk about someone being a person's disciple is to say that person sat at that person's feet and listened to them. So it could be, and it's quite legitimate to understand, that Mary's not at home at all. Mary's out on the road doing ministry, being a disciple of Jesus, just like the other disciples. And the text is saying this is the Martha whose sister Mary is a disciple of Jesus because she sits at Jesus' feet. And Martha's language is going to confirm some of that when she says, Mary has physically deserted me and left me alone. Right? She's not home. She's not here. She's out doing fun ministry and left me home here. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Because after that, we say Mary is distracted, which is actually this active, ongoing, it's a participle that says she is greatly troubled. This isn't a new thing, this isn't a singular time. She is regularly, greatly troubled with her many, if you read there, you'll get the word tasks. And if you ask me that we've done no greater disservice to Martha than to tell the world she was overwhelmed with tasks, because the Greek word is diakonai, which is ministry. In every other instance in the New Testament, that word is translated as ministry, the ministry of being a deacon, of hospitality and service and care and mission. It's Stephen who was appointed to be the person to make sure everybody got the food of the table and who preached the word so prophetically that he was the first Christian martyr. It's that word, and it says that's what Martha is doing. She isn't just sitting in the kitchen supposed to feed the house guest. She's overwhelmed with ministry. She's Moses saying, God, these are stubborn people and they ask a lot of me and no one else wants to help because it's not much fun to get stuck washing dishes and binding up broken bones and doing all those things. It seems so much more fun to be out on the road with you. Can you go tell my sister to come home and help me? That's what she says. Command her is actually the text. To come home and help me because she's abandoned me with all of this deacon ministry. This is a really great time to point out that when the nominating calls to try to get elders and deacons, it's way harder to get deacons, because we think it's a thankless task that involves dealing with people and being stuck in the kitchen. Martha's been our champion of deacons forever and ever, and we haven't been calling her that because we just said she was overwhelmed with many tasks. And she says, I'm tired of deaconing alone. Tell Mary, my disciple, apostle, sister, to come home and be a deacon with me. Martha is anxious to the point of being divided in herself. She is agitated to the point of being in a panic about many things. Have you heard the saying, all the alls? Yeah, she's just overwhelmed with all that life has thrown at her. And maybe a little bit, she misses her sister. And then Jesus says, Martha, Martha, you are worried about a great many things. There's only one thing. Your sister has chosen the good portion. Not the better portion, the good portion for her. I'm not going to take that away from her. In this moment, I believe, I'm convicted by the idea, even if you don't buy all that counter exegesis to the normal traditional way we are encounter these two characters. I'm convicted by the idea that Jesus immediately sees two things Mary needs. One, Mary needs to learn to say no to some things. I mean, not Mary, Martha. I hate when I do that. You're like, I just ruined the whole sermon. Jeez. There's still a good portion. Jesus knows two things about Martha, and he says, Martha, Martha, first, calm down. You're worried about too many things. It's more than you can bear. Do you remember what Jethro says to Moses? You need to go get some helpers. You can't do this alone. It doesn't have to be Mary, though. Right? Martha, choose one thing. At first light, someone said, well, what is that one thing? And I said, I called Jesus. He didn't return the call. But I think the point isn't that there's an identifiable one thing. I think the point is to say, today there's one thing, right? I'm going to go back to the creation story. I love the 7 days of creation because I'm convinced God could just snap God's fingers and it's just done. But that's not how God rolls. Bob Ross God says, ooh, I like the idea of putting some little light over here. And we're going to have some darkness here that hints at opportunity in the stillness for more creation. And I'm done. And then you could hear the accuser, the other voice of God saying, you're not done. All you've got is 2 blobs of paint on a canvas. God says, no, today, that's the one thing. We're done. The rest can wait. If I start demanding it all get done in one day now, we're not going to make it very far. And God seals up the paint and goes to bed. And the next day, God says, we're going to put a nice little blob of blue and brown down here. We're going to separate them out a little bit, but tomorrow we'll worry about what goes on there. That looks really good. That's my one thing. And I think Jesus looks at Martha, who's trying rightly in many ways to do all the alls, and says, Martha, one thing. It's okay. Let the other stuff go. There's tomorrow. And I think that's a gift we all need to hear. Clarity about what's today's one thing. And let tomorrow worry about tomorrow. Somewhere important says that too. And the other voice is to say, and by the way, you don't get to make Mary look like you. I know it's hard to miss your sister or your brother. We talked a little bit before about what it's like to be the person who leaves home, but it's also hard to be the person who doesn't. To be the elder brother or the younger brother, they both have their challenges. And we tend to be so engrossed in our own challenge that we don't want to see our brothers or our sisters or our neighbors or our friends' challenge are equally challenging while being completely different than our own. I can have chosen a good portion, and it looks nothing like someone else's good portion. But if, in fact, at the beginning of that creation story, or in the right matter of days, God says to God's own corporate identity, as the scripture records, let us create humankind in our image. What we're doing, our ministry, our diacony, our tasks are varied because we're trying to reflect the whole being of God. And I don't know about you, but I'm not enough big enough mirror to do it by myself. And neither is Mary, and neither is Martha. Jesus says to Martha, let Mary be Mary, and you be you. And that is enough. In fact, it's what the world needs. They don't need another me running around. They need you being you, doing your one thing. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.